Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Navy, and today we are going to read two spicy stories from the subreddit r/pro-revenge. We've got no time to waste, so let's get right into it. First title being My 850 Revenge on My Cheating and Thieving Ex. When I was at uni, I started dating this guy. At first, he was wonderful, dedicated to his studies, fun to be around, attentive, always surprising me with things, and working hard at his job. Then, bit by bit, things unraveled. He started skipping classes, then he barely bothered to go at all. Worse still, he never helped around the house, never washed up, cleaned up, did laundry, nothing. He was even fired from his job for too many no-shows. All he wanted to do was sit at home and play Xbox or browse the message boards and forums. This was in the days before social media, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. This left me having to pick up extra shifts, sometimes double and triple shifts, all while going to class and studying. I later learned that this was a pattern for him. He'd be really dedicated to whatever he set his heart on, but then get bored and fall back into old bad habits. Then he'd find a new passion and rinse and repeat. I knew I should have ended the relationship much sooner, but I held out hope that he would snap out of it, that maybe it was just an exam stress getting to him. I desperately wanted things to go back to how they were, but it was not meant to be. I caught him cheating and threw him out. I was so stressed with everything that it wasn't until the next day that our joint savings account crossed my mind. There was a little over 5k in there, and just a few hundred from him. The rest was my money I had saved. I checked the account and it was all gone. My ex had cleaned out the account and moved into a new flat with his side chick. Called the bank and there was nothing they could do. He was authorized for the account. I contacted the police. They told me there was nothing they could do since it was a joint account, so nothing criminal had happened. They suggested taking it to civil court, but said I'd probably spend more money than I got back in legal fees. So it likely wasn't worth it. My ex had stolen £5,000 and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt like such an idiot. I got even angrier when I saw his posts on various forums boasting about his new game consoles, new games, new TVs, and gadgets, all bought with my money. I'm not usually a vengeful person, petty on occasion, sure, but I've never wanted to exact revenge as much as I did right then, and I knew just how to do it. While I was a student, I tempted every summer to help pay for my studies. One such job had been for a debt collection agency. The work was as shitty as you can imagine, but it paid really well, and it was only for a few months. My ex had been dodging debt for many years, and he was very proud of that fact. He was also proud of the fact that his debt was close to being statute-barred and he hadn't paid a penny. For those of you who don't know, in the UK, creditors have about 6 years to collect the debt, and then it becomes statute-barred. That means the money is still owed, but creditors have no legal way to enforce payment, such as using bailiffs. My ex was a few months away from reaching statute-barred status. However, what a lot of people don't know is that making a payment on that debt resets the clock. If you pay any amount, then that 6 years starts from scratch. Previously, I had used my insider knowledge to help him dodge the debt. Now I would use it to hit him where it hurt. By the end of our relationship, I was handling everything, including his debts. I had the paperwork so I knew who he owed and how much. I called his creditors up, I was honest and said I was a friend calling to make a payment on his behalf. I didn't pretend to be him because that would be a big legal no-no. They weren't allowed to disclose any details, but they were able to take payment. I paid the minimum I could on each debt, about £1 on most, but one had a minimum payment of £1.50. It was the best £8.50 I have ever spent. I also made sure to give them his new address and contact details, as well as his parents' address. Having worked in the biz, I knew they wouldn't change the address since I wasn't the account holder, but they would note it. They had various systems where they could search for his name against that address and see if anything came up. If they got a hit, they would change the address. The trap was set, all I had to do was wait. Few months rolled by, then it happened. His post on the forums went from boasting about his new gaming PC to panic about a court date. He called me and begged for advice. I told him to F off. Seeing I wouldn't help, he asked for advice in the forums. One of his online friends told him not to turn up to court. That way, they wouldn't be able to prosecute without him there. It was terrible advice that was 100% untrue. In fact, not showing up is one of the worst things you can do, especially in civil court. This was getting better and better. The court date came and went. My ex naturally didn't go. A few weeks later, my ex posted photos of his empty flat. Bailiffs had cleaned him out and taken every last one of his shiny new gadgets and toys. On top of that, he ended up with several CCGs, county court judgments. These are a big deal and can seriously damage your credit history, making it hard to get bank accounts outside of basic ones, near impossible to get credit, including getting a mortgage. And it can also make it hard to rent a place since many landlords don't like renting to people with CCGs, as they are considered high risk. He also won't be able to find jobs in the financial sector. Now that he was broke and didn't have nice things, his side chick left him. I never got my 5k back, but it felt good to see everything he bought with his ill-gotten gains taken away. Hope that 5k was worth it. For anyone wondering how a student incurred 6 years of debt, he started at the university I attended when he was 25. He had initially gone to a different university at 18 but dropped out at 19 and went into the world of work. Then he convinced his parents to fund a business degree. He wanted to become an entrepreneur. And for anyone worried about the age gap, I deferred my uni start date by a few years so I could travel. I was 22 when we started dating, he was 26. Well, that is one way to get revenge on an ex that wasted so much of your time. It's good at least that you left him and didn't waste any more time or money on a 26-year-old baby. Let's see what other redditors have been saying in the comments. Ayaka Dahlia said, I live near a military base in the US and I've heard horror stories of young Marines giving their girlfriends access to their accounts or even signing a power of attorney for them. They go overseas on deployment and then come home to find an empty apartment/house, accounts emptied, etc. There are some truly heartless people out there, man. OP responded, yup, there are some real leeches out there. So sad that so many get taken advantage of. The people, the nice people, yeah? And after that, Fully Stone asked, well, guess the joint account was his idea? Not exactly. We opened it because we were saving to be able to afford to live in a house instead of pokey student flats. We wanted lots of room with a nice sized garden and everything. So we were talking about saving and we found this savings account with a really good deal on the interest rates. Basically, the interest rate got higher and higher the more you put in. And you also got a bonus interest rate on top of that, the longer you left money there. So it was sort of a joint decision and I don't think he specifically suggested it. The next story is still about cheating, but it should be spicier than the first one. This one including an ex-felon who should not be practicing the things that got him in jail in the first place. The title of the story being Stepdad cheats on my mom so we get revenge. This may be a long one, apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my bio dad was ended. He was a manipulative asshole, but that's another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now, my mom worked as a correctional officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate in for DUI. That should have been the first red flag, but my mom was grieving a long marriage and I didn't want to push the subject. Chris seemed to make her happy and that was enough for me. Me, bro and sis all came in with my mom and Chris and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love for video games and all seemed well. That is until 2017. Due to Chris's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day he didn't return and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him from Texas. Turns out when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated on a number of gang and drug related crimes. And due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on the hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence and allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DQ he worked at allowed him to come back as well back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now, obviously, because of his DUI, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking and when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's coworkers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the info from, Betty told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla. How he regularly had Darla perform sexual acts in and around his workplace. How Betty had caught them and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her. He was the store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things and to dump it outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair and that he was happy Darla was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids. We three were massive strains on her body. She likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley with an officer present and he left our lives. The revenge. Now, my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands off him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal and wanted nothing more from him, but sis, bro and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. DQ operates independently owned franchise and the owner of this branch owned several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the sexual acts being performed on the premises and he went through the process of getting Chris booted from his position and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Funnily enough, Betty got his position after he left and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so he went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another DQ in the town and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer due to there being no current incident actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us, since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here he was, clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood and that we believed Chris was driving without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be Chris driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises there, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute ass Chris was and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tons of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault. All in the same letter, mind you. Mom burned every one of them. We moved on, moving out of state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and sis moved on and out, and I still live with my mom, assisting her with a newly purchased home, and we've been renovating. Life's looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters and thought to post it here for others to enjoy. And enjoyed we are. This is a pretty interesting story of how OP wasted a couple of years of a jerk's life. Nothing to say other than he deserved it. Remember, revenge is not the best option, but you can still enjoy it. Thanks for watching and do not forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell. I wish you a nice morning, evening or night depending on where you are.